Hello.
Welcome to welcome to
Hello.
our third conversation about mothers against racism. Just a conversation about race from a mother's perspective. I am your host, your co-host, Daniel LaForce and
Donna Marshall.
Donna Marshall, and we have a very, very special guest with us this evening. Um, Cristina Perez, Judge Cristina Perez. We are so excited to have you. For those of you guys who don't know, and I'm sure you guys all do know of Judge Cristina Perez, she is a successful television personality, a lawyer, a radio host, a business owner, a national author and columnist, a devoted mother to Sofia Gonzalez, and a devoted wife to Christopher Gonzalez. Pleasure to have you on, Judge Perez.
Thank you so much, Dani and Donna. It is just such a pleasure to be here. It's always good to be with company with really strong, very committed women in their lives. It's just, to me, that's the ultimate way of us supporting each other and supporting our family. So thank you so much for inviting me and thinking of me to be with you here with you guys tonight.
Was it a hard decision to come on board and talk with us?
Absolutely not.
Okay, great.
No. Especially because of Dani. I mean, I so much admire her and who she is as a person, as a mother. I think that's how Dani and I connected. Well, there's a story, but what I think really pulled me into her, and I think this is something that us women don't give each other enough, I think, boost about, is what a job we do as mothers, what kind of job it takes to raise kids. And just to see the type of the boys that Dania has raised, it speaks volumes about the type of individual she is and her character that she has and her goals in life. So that to me is always, my father and my mother, they're from South America, but there's a saying in Spanish that says, I won't say it in Spanish because I don't know who will understand it, but essentially kids are the evidence of our existence. And it's so true. So that's our job, to put kids out there so they in turn remember who they were or who they are and what we taught them and what our culture taught them and what we as parents and grandparents and the past has taught them. So that's what really attracted me to Dania. And I immediately knew she was just such a quality individual.
Well, I appreciate that.
And that's nice.
And just a little backstory, Cristina and I met about over a year ago when her daughter was being recruited to play college women's basketball. And congratulations to Sofia on her announcement to play college basketball. It's a very something that's great to be able to play at the next level. And your daughter obviously has such a passion for the game, and it was beautiful to see. But we did connect, and I think we connected as mothers during the recruiting process. And I wasn't recruiting Sofia; my husband was recruiting Sofia. But I think Cristina and I connected and had some sidebar conversations about how we both ended up where we were, having raised our kids to love the game of basketball and just to be quality people first and foremost. And Sofia and obviously your family, you guys are just that. And with any good recruitment, you become family. So I think my husband did an excellent job recruiting.
He sure did.
The Perez and the Gonzalez family, because we stayed connected even when the recruiting process ended. We still remained friends. So I really want to thank you for coming on and being a part of what Donna and I are trying to start here, just some awareness and a resource of education for mothers out there who are trying to navigate through this world right now, and what's going on with racism and police brutality, and some mothers out there are at a loss. And I think with you being so successful, not only as a great mother and a great wife, but in your career, and as well as Donna and myself, there are things we can share, I think, to mothers out there, and that's what this platform is for. We truly believe that when people hear our story, that insight gives them a perspective that will allow them to accept others who are maybe different, because we all have a story. We all come from somewhere. We all, are the way we are is because of the way we were raised. And, you mentioned your dad a little while ago, and I want you to share a little bit about your father and the impact he has made on your life, as well as your mom, because I think in reading about that, I think it's a very special story and something that should be shared.
Oh, thank you. So my mother and father are immigrants. They are from South America, Colombia. I was actually, my father, I don't want to say it's a typical immigrant story, but it really is. But every typical immigrant story is really such a beautiful, unique, individual story. My parents were married at a young age. My father was an educated man. My mother was as well. His dream was to become a doctor. So he figured the best way he could do that was to work, make enough money, and then return back to Colombia because he was going to take over his uncle's practice and he had to make money. He had family in the United States. And so just with that hope and that dream to come and make a better place for himself and his future family, he came to New York. And his story as an educated man always gives me chills when I think about it, because my father came to this country as a good individual, as he came in legally into the country, ironically, which it's not ironic, but I say that because it's important for people who have a preconceived idea of what an immigrant is. And he came here with the purpose to work. He had 4 or 5 different jobs. And what we learned through his story as an immigrant and my mother's story as an immigrant, that my father was judged first by his accent, not by his brain, not by his character, simply by his accent. And that till today is devastating, to think that an individual who was so educated, who was coming here for the purpose to work, was belittled because he had an accent. And that to me just today doesn't sit right. And unfortunately, it still happens today. My father really overcame unspeakable discrimination and obstacles, but he and my mother pursued their dreams to really make a better place for their family and give them every single opportunity that they did not have. They worked their butts off. My father, ironically, and he had like 5 different jobs. And one of the best stories that my father says, that during the war, he's a surgeon, I should say. He's very good with his hands. So he worked for Bulova making timepieces. And he was so good. He was so fast. That's how he realized he was able to make more money. But essentially, he followed his dream. Ironically, he ended up going to medical school in Mexico, in Guadalajara, and that's where I was raised. It was easier and more economical to go to an American medical school, approved school, which all we had to do was drive. And but essentially, that story, there's so much more to it, so many layers. But I always remember that for me is when I describe my parents' journey, is being judged by an accent and versus the worth of the human being is just not acceptable.
Agreed.
That's a great story. How about your mom?
My mom was my father's partner, and without my mother, even my dad will say that he could not have done what he did. She sacrificed. Her English was not as good, but it was still good enough. She was isolated while my father had 4 or 5 jobs, pregnant, raising people. She relied on her community. She got to know her community, the Latino community around her. She found solace in getting to know some neighbors who were not Latino, but they were so they embraced her. And they were able to associate with her, which is a topic I want to talk about, is being culturally competent. I read that somewhere and I love that word, trying to understand each other. And she made great friends, but it was very difficult for her because she was isolated. She was by herself. I remember that she says that when they lived in their first apartment in New York was a step up. So she had to go up, no elevator, 5 flights of stairs, pregnant, up and down. So it was very difficult for her, but she knew that she gave up her dream because her dream now was my father's dream. And it was a collective dream to become successful, for them to create a life that they both desired and wanted. So as a mother, as a wife, she was very selfless, and she put her husband first and her family first. And she always says, but that was my family. That was my dream too. So it's very rewarding to know that she felt that way, and she still believes that.
That's excellent. Now, I wanted to ask you a question. Obviously, you're a very successful attorney. You have a very successful television show, Judge Cristina Perez, Justice for All. You've written 2 books, and may I mention you are a 2-time Emmy winner?
3 times.
3 time. Okay, I'm a 3-time Emmy Award
and
winner.
3 books. Yes.
And 3 books, right?
Yeah,
So,
that sounds so catty. I apologize, but yes.
No. Correct me, please. That's awesome. And I actually had a chance to hold your Emmy Awards at your home. Do you remember that during a recruiting trip?
Yes.
Time holding an Emmy Award. It's very heavy.
Yes.
But how has your father's story and your father's discipline, as well as your mother, and how has their journey pursuing the American dream affected your career? Like, what did you learn from what they went through, and how do you think it shaped you? You being an attorney and obviously a judge, and how you interact with a lot of people through the television show. How has that impacted your career? What lessons did you take from your upbringing to make you the woman and the woman and that you are today?
That is such a good question. And I think I can answer it 2 ways. One way, professionally, is that I firmly believe that we're all on an even ground, right? It doesn't matter if you graduated from so-and-so school or you graduated from so-and-so school. We should all, once we've reached that and we've graduated, we should always treat each other as if we're all starting from the beginning, because I think that's really important. Because in anything, I always tell the litigants that appear on the court shows, we're a team here. I might be sitting here with the robe helping figure out what's going to happen, but we're a team. I need you as a plaintiff and you as a defendant to help us figure out what the proper solution is. So for me, I learned that from my father. My father was a team player, but he knew that the quality of his work would be what people would remember. So even when making timepieces for bazookas, as an immigrant, as a Latino, being the first chief of staff in a hospital, or being the first surgical resident for their surgery department, he knew that at the end of the day, people will remember the work and the quality of work. They will slowly forget that it came from a Latino, it came from a Black, it came from a woman, it came from an Asian. They will end up remembering the quality of the work. And my father taught me that when you do that, when you do the best job you can do, then that is reward of itself, because you'll help people get over that. And he always remembers me. He always reminds me of the time when he had one of his bosses while he was doing a surgical residency, just maybe didn't believe in him too much. I don't want to be too blunt in how my father was treated, but years later he saw him and said, hey, Dario, you were such a damn good worker. And he remembered that. So it's almost like you let go of your stupid inadequacies and you remember the quality of the work. Now, my second answer is what I learned from my mother. I learned that being a feminist is not a bad thing. I always call myself a confused feminist because, and I wrote that in my book, because I often believe that it's perfectly okay that I take care of my husband before I take care of myself, that I take care of the needs of my daughter before I take care of myself, that I make sure that, stupid things, but things, as women, what it takes to run a house. That's okay. I could do that while I'm being an attorney, while I'm working on television. I can do all of that because that's my identity. That's who I am. And I proudly take that. And I don't mind that I serve my husband. And it sounds so old fashioned, but that's who we are. I don't mind that I go to my parents' house or, hey, Dad, how are you doing? What do you want? What do you want me to make you? I think being as authentic as possible in your culture and how you were raised, I think is the most important thing to kind of round up that answer, which was a very long-winded one. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No, that's fine. That was great. That was great. And in terms of, obviously your dad said, let your work speak for itself and they will forget about everything else. But when that does not happen in this society, when that does not happen in America, when people cannot get past your accent, or they cannot get past the color of your skin, or they can't get past certain things about you that shouldn't be used as a judgment for how they feel. What was there ever a situation that those teachings that your father taught you were not true in a specific situation, that you felt maybe unfairly treated because of anything, any racist or any racism
experience
that was against?
I think that I, as a woman in growing up, suffered, I don't want to say word suffered, experienced more things based on sex and sexism, right? But if we're talking about racism here, things that, doing the best and being the best you can be, and always putting your best foot down, you practice the hardest, you do this the hardest because people remember that, I think is something that keeps me going. But instances where I know that it has affected me, where sometimes it's not good enough for people.
Yes.
For example, I mean, this is one where I'll never forget my father, and these are experiences that happened to my parents. My father, when he was doing his surgical residency, he was chief of the ER, and he saved enough money to buy himself a tiny little sports car. Remember those MR2s in Toyota? They were tiny little, looked like a jackbox. But hey, he saved up money. And it was 3:00 in the morning. He was speeding down, and he had to get to the ER, and he was pulled over for speeding, naturally. And he explained that, listen, I have to go to the ER. I'm literally 2 blocks away. And the police officer didn't believe him. And my father's like, well, I'm sorry if you don't believe me, but my father took off, and that was so dangerous, right? But he took off, and they followed him, and they realized, oh, okay, I'm so sorry. But my father was trying to live up to his reputation as being, his priority was his patient, and he had to be there. I think that's something that doesn't really relate to your best job, but you know what I'm trying to say. That's something that sticks to you. Here's somebody who's working hard. Just what, you don't believe him because he has an accident, he's driving a brand new car, that's not his car, and that, yeah, fine, he's not a surgeon. I mean, that really came out of your mouth. This is not your car, really? You expect me to believe you're a doctor? I mean, come on, that's stupidity. But that hurts. But my father let it go, And then another time, which was one that still eats me up, because this happened just literally less in the last, I'd say maybe 8 years. My mother still has a very heavy accent, but you understand her. Everybody understands her. I mean, sometimes you have to listen a little harder. But she called an insurance company, and the operator was so rude to her. I don't understand you. I don't understand what you're trying to say. And, I was there, and it infuriated me. I got on the phone. I said, what do you mean? I said, if I understand her, you can understand her. So we spoke to a supervisor. But it's those little things that people don't understand when they are not culturally competent or a little bit compassionate, that can have an everlasting stake in your heart, where you're like,
that's
oh
right.
My God, how dare they? I think that's one thing we need to understand, that we as individuals sometimes, unfortunately, have such power in how you treat another human being, that I wish we would understand. You can, like, that saying, I'll never forgive. I mean, I'll forgive, but I won't forget. It's that. And that's very hard when we're talking about race. If we're really trying to be, more authentic with each other and open with each other, and competent about discussions of race, well, then, it starts with just having a little bit more character and a little bit better manners. And I mean, I know that sounds so simple, but it's so true.
Excellent.
And when you were raising your daughter, what did you try to instill in her?
Well, I think I'm going to be raising my daughter for the rest of her life. I mean, I think we will, right? We
Right.
have that.
Yes,
I see Dana and
never
I in college,
doesn't stop.
in her professional athlete son. You're always having an influence. But Donna, with my daughter, I think is having these type of candid conversations with her that my parents and I didn't. Maybe it was culturally, it was, they were recent immigrants. They didn't understand, I'm first generation. So maybe it's having these kinds of conversations. I try to raise her as, encourage her to experience different things, to talk to her, And if she has questions, not judge people. She knows very well the story of my father, of my mother, of everything. Even my husband's, my husband is Puerto Rican and his parents are also Puerto Rican, understanding that as well. So I just want to be as real and authentic with her and have her ask me anything because she sees it. I think this generation is super smart. They're a lot more perceptive than we were growing up.
And how has she been dealing with, if you don't mind, how has she been dealing with the recent events since I'm putting the timeline on George Floyd because I think that's when the real big protests started and people speaking out. How is she handling it? Is this disturbing to her?
I think that she's always been very sensitive about race and culture, et cetera, and bias and things of that nature. But she's older now. So she's 17. She is a senior in high school. And I cannot begin to tell you, it has affected her deeply. It is devastating for her. It is discouraging for her. And I'm seeing this not only in her, but in the same generation. It's empowering her to really have a bigger voice than I did when I was her age. So I'm all for that. And I explain to her, like in anything, how you speak, what you say, and how you say it is very important because I want her to be able to get her point across and not be basically, take it for granted about what she says. So I think that, I encourage her, diversity is very important. She is diverse. She has a very strong opinion about what's right and wrong, which I like. And so I just encourage her to understand her point of view and where she's coming from and be able to express it.
Okay. It seems, I feel like when I've been watching protests and going to protests, there are so many young people of all kinds of backgrounds at them. I feel like your young people are just taking this so to heart. It's great.
They are. And what's amazing is that, and I hope this is true, and I'm getting chills thinking about it. I think that maybe I'm just speaking about her generation because that's what's in front of me and I'm able to live it every day. I think they're a lot more sensitive to each other. They're a lot more accepting. They're a lot more competent in how to speak to each other and understand each other. Obviously, they understand, you're white, you're black, you're Hispanic, you're Asian, they get that. But it doesn't seem as, I don't want to simplify, but it doesn't seem as relevant to them when they're creating their friendship. They're able to kind of see it, but okay, whatever, So I feel like they're much more inclusive. And I'm hoping that is the case.
And that leads me to my next question. Do you think the fact that she's so open and well-rounded and understanding of others because of you and what you have taught her throughout her life and also what you have learned from your mom and dad, like, do you think it's generational? Do you think it came, you know what I'm saying, as opposed to just, her age? Like, what's your thought on generational racism versus?
Yeah, that is such a fantastic question, because when we're speaking about generations or generational racism, I think that there is generational racism and bias. And that's obvious. I mean, I think culturally that's part of it. But I don't think it runs from generation to generation, because my view on race may be different than my parents' view on race. I know it is. And it's very different than my grandparents. So I think Sophia has a much more sophisticated view about what race is, racism is, and how to treat each other. Maybe that's handed down from generation. I also think it's because I would like to think it's part of my husband and I and how we speak to her and treat her, and maybe the example that she sees. But it's also, I think, subconsciously as a parent, it's the kind of people we want her to surround herself with, right? The kind of people we encourage her, the kind of person we encourage her to be, that I think it naturally gravitates herself to becoming close to different people. And, without a label. And I think that's important. I think that being in law, the law is the greatest equalizer for people, right? If you sue each other, Donna failed to pay me, she has an excuse. Well, the law is going to figure it out. I know it's not perfect. Yeah. People complain about the law all the time, but it is the greatest equalizer, right? It ends up deciding who's right and who's wrong. So, I think maybe she also learns from my husband also being an attorney. She learns that law helps that. Right. And so, yeah, I think it's a combination. I'm hoping the generational thing has improved for her, and being surrounded around amazing people like you, your husband, Dania. Someday she'll meet Donna, but friends that we hold dear to us. I think that's helped her too.
Diversity. Yes, that's wonderful. One of my questions is, obviously we want to be a resource for mothers to navigate, like I said, through the state of the world right now. And some of them are struggling with when to have the conversation about race and racism with their children, at what age, and what do they say. So if you had advice to a young mother or a mother of a young child, and this is going on around them in the world, what would you encourage them to say? What advice would you share with them or give them to kind of help their child? And at what age do you think that conversation should be had?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's having a conversation about race. I think it is such a subjective thing, but and I think it really depends on the family, where you are. But I think the sooner a child can understand it, the better, in my opinion. But better yet, ideally, is if people automatically, I think just not expose their kids, but really go out of their way. I mean, I think it's a little bit difficult for me to answer, because I'm thinking about myself. It was part of who I am and my identity. So it was very natural to talk about it. Right. Like when she was little, and I would go out and I'd speak to her in Spanish because she was fluent in Spanish, because that is my first language. I wanted my child to learn Spanish. And, she would speak Spanish. And so for me, it was very easy. It was always part of how I raised her. But I would hope that parents have it quicker than not, especially with what's happening. We can't have our kids live in a bubble. And it's so stupid that we're even thinking about this, because we should just be living side by side and just working and being judged by our character and our worth as human beings versus a label of who we are. But I mean, hopefully, I don't know. I mean, parents have to really kind of gauge that, but I think obviously the sooner the better.
Right.
So it's just like the birds and the bees. I mean, I hate to compare it to that because it is absolutely different. But I mean, kids are smarter, right? People are having a serious conversation with kids much quicker because things are changing so much. Generations are really much more mature than they were when we were.
And I remember you and I had a conversation prior to discussing being a part of this platform. And I said, I think you would be great because a lot of people, when they look at you, they automatically think that you're white. Yeah. And then, and obviously you have a very rich cultural background. You have your shows are in English and in Spanish. You really, obviously, it's part of your identity, like you said. Was there ever a chance where people assumed that you were white, and then when they found out that you weren't, that you may or may not have felt that they treated you any differently? I mean, I think from what I'm hearing is you work so hard to make sure your work spoke for who you are, not your identity. And I think that's what I'm getting. But were there any situations where once they found out you were not white, that they kind of changed, their the way they
Yeah.
treated you or spoke to you? Or
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Most definitely. When I was in law school, when I was starting to work, and it was very frustrating, very, very frustrating.
Mhm.
And I remember kind of being at a crossroads and saying, okay, I've got three things against me. I'm a woman, I am Latina, and I'm a lawyer. And lawyers are a dime a dozen, right? But three things against me. So, the woman thing and the cultural thing was very difficult to try to justify to people, right? I had to work harder just because of that. And I can give you so many examples, but I learned from that frustration and a little bit of anger. I said, screw it. I said, I'm going to be unabashedly a woman and Latina. And I started speaking to my colleagues, treating my bosses, my clients like I do my family. Not afraid to be, to talk, to share, to open myself. I remember my first job, and he is still one of my best friends in the whole world. I'd get up and get him coffee, and people are like, Christina, why are you getting, Umberto coffee? Because he's my boss. That's what I would do for my husband, my dad.
Right.
And it in no way did I learn, because I think the confidence of how I portrayed it, did it ever hurt me as a professional? On the contrary, I have found that has been the key to my success. Actually embracing my different, why I'm different, embracing it and using it in my profession has completely helped me, because it's made me different. My clients aren't just a paper. My cases are not just a paper, I should say. Like when I was starting in practice, my clients weren't just a file. They were somebody that I knew their story. I sympathized. So it was better for me to argue or defend them or to assist them in whatever I was doing. And that's what I try to do with the case on television as well. I need to understand your story. Please explain it to me. Because if I understand, what is happening, you realize, it's not about the money. It's not about sometimes on TV, the 15 minutes of fame. It's about just being heard and somebody listening to you. And so I found that ended up being a sense of, I don't want to say power, but a very positive thing in my life. So I stopped not caring, but I said, okay, I'm going to twist it around. The negatives that people thought were negatives, I'm going to turn them into my positive. And whether you believe them or not, that they were they were mine, and you knew the moment I walked in the door, I was very confident in that, and you accepted it or you didn't. So, I mean, I'm sure people haven't accepted it and they haven't liked it, but that's okay.
You're not a confused feminist. You have your own feminism and what it means for you. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Something that I wanted to ask you is, what do you think as mothers we should be doing today? What can we do?
Okay, that's a great question. So I think the only way, we can talk about, institutionalized racism, systemic racism. We can start looking at all those labels, right? But what are the answers? How do we change our perception, the generational perception, the institutionalized racism? What do we do? I think that we have to create diversity in leadership, in companies, in politics, in business, in everything. And how do we do that? We start creating leaders. So as our job as moms and fathers is to start creating those kids that can be able to get into those roles. Encouraging education, encouraging being at what you're really good at, because hopefully they're going to be a change. And then also for us, I think, and our kids that we're teaching this, is opening the door and welcoming each other in, being able to help each other. And that's something that I know I don't do enough of. And I know people really try to, but we don't. So a way of really encompassing and helping each other. So I think that's, in my opinion, Donna, that's probably the most powerful way. We talk about diversity in leadership, diversity in business, diversity in everyday situations. Well, it's our job to create these kids that are going to step into those roles and explain to them how important that is, because without having kids there to change those roles, we're going to see the systematic change. We won't see a change in how the system keeps going. So I think that to me is by far the most important thing.
The thing I've appreciated most is watching anything on television with all these beautiful young people of all colors, all cultures, everything, and they're standing up and saying, "No more. We're not going to tolerate it." I've been so proud of them for being so strong, because that's who's out there. It's these beautiful young people.
Yep, it is. And ironically, somebody said to me the other day, "Do you think that," which is, I may not want to repeat it, but I'll paraphrase it. Is it just about the Black community right now? Right? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, yes, what we're seeing in the news every day is about that. So it takes my Latina daughter to be able to, and this is why I think these kids get it. I don't know if it was Dana or you, Donna, that said it. They're out there. They're a united front. Mm-hmm. They are together advocating for the same thing. They get it. This is not just one thing that's affecting one community. It is affecting all of ours, because how are we we're going to be able to have that diversity that we need to change businesses, to change, how the state and federal government deal with different ethnic minorities. How are we going to be able to do that if we don't have a united front? And I think these kids are doing it, and I'm just hoping that they continue to do it, because it's so, so important.
Right. They're embracing and celebrating diversity.
They sure. I mean,
yeah.
And recognizing systemic racism and where it exists in all those areas that you mentioned. I think that's very important too, that they're starting to recognize it and stand up against it as a unit, despite race, despite gender, despite so many things, they're sticking up for it, for the Black community, like you said. So now the Black community, I think we lost Donna.
I think we did. We should come back on.
I know. Now the Black community has allies, and I think that's
it's true. I mean, and I think we need to see each other as one community. I mean, obviously, it's a dream, but I think it's so powerful how we see these kids really, really unite. And it's not just the kids. It's not just the younger generation, Sophia's generation. I think we're seeing it in our generation as mothers now that we are talking about mothers against racism. I think we're tired of it. It's a perpetual problem that cannot be resolved. When is it going to be resolved? Right. And I just hope that we are powerful enough to be able to change people in their minds. I just really, really hope, and I think we will. I think it's going to take time, but I think it's to the point where we've all kind of had enough. So I think we have a lot of allies in each other, and as long as we show this type of diversity, this type of diversity, I think it's really important. You came back, Donna.
Great. We lost you for a second, Donna. Is she there? Can you hear us, Donna?
Sorry for my technical difficulties. Okay, I'm here. You got it? Sorry about that. I'm a little bit in the dark.
I have one last question for you, Cristina. I think, Donna, you don't have the headphones anymore, right? One last question. Your show is called Justice for All. With Judge Cristina Perez.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Mike, I could hear you.
Yes, we can, Donna.
But my question for you is, what is your definition of justice, and how can it be for all? Like, justice for all is, I think, what everybody is fighting for out there. And your title is beautifully stated that, justice for all. What's your definition of justice for all?
Justice for all. You know, I really love the I didn't pick out my name. Byron Allen, who is the president of the entertainment studios where we produce the show, did. And he talk about, you know, somebody taking a leadership role in politics and in business. That's somebody we want, you know, we want to kind of emulate. But for him, I think when he picked it, you know, we were talking about doing a court show, and he's like, you know, Cristina, that's what you're about. That, you know, you want, and I think that is who I am now that I'm thinking about it. I want everybody to be treated the same. It's such a wish. But for me, that's how I start. I start with, we're all right here. And depending on what you do and what you say, you may go up or you may go down. But for me, justice for all is, we should all start from the same place and determine our worth and how we should work or place ourselves in the world by what we're doing and what we're saying. Because, you know, justice has to be for all, and we all have to work on it. And it's really important that we do that. So for me, you know, like I said before, the law is the greatest equalizer. It's there to help, to protect. It should always be there to help and protect. So therefore, you know, let's try to remember that. But the best way to have justice for all is by truly treating each other, I think, with that same respect. You know, meeting you, oh, hello, Dania LaForce. You know, I don't know anything about you, but tell me about yourself. You know, endear me with your life and some lessons. Because once I have that, then I know your story.
Exactly.
And I will be able to move forward, right? It's like that, what we said at the very beginning, being competent in each other's story is such a powerful thing.
And that's exactly why we felt this platform was necessary, because everyone has a story. And we want to give mothers an opportunity to share their stories and hope that it helps, you know, really end this disease of racism, you know, and it has to stop. And not, like you said, not everyone has the answers, but we're hoping we can share some sort of compassion for each other and for one another based on our stories that we tell. And that's pretty much what Donna, our vision for Mothers Against Racism, and why we have this platform right here.
I think it's an incredible platform. I think it's an incredible platform, and I so admire you guys for doing this. And I hope you are able to touch people and convince them that by just talking, that is so powerful.
Good. Well, we really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, but I wanted to also shout out the shirts that you're wearing.
Yes.
So your shirts, Mothers Against Racism.
Yes.
We're here to stay. We're here to make a change. Even if it's a subtle change, I think we as moms have the responsibility to do what's best, not only for our children, but the children of the world. It's our responsibility, and we have to stand up as a unit and fight this. So thank you again for your time. It was a great conversation. Donna, can you hear us?
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so very much.
Thank you both so much. What a privilege. Thank you very much, guys.
All right,
Besito.
thank you. Bye-bye.